All right, welcome back everybody to day 3 of Foundations of Programming. It's good to see all you guys. We are missing who are we missing? I know we're missing Rachel and Chase. Hopefully they're able to funnel in later in class. For those of you who are here, thank you for being here. Yesterday we were talking about HTML. We had a brief introduction. And we had an instructor example with the states.html page. We're gonna go ahead and build off on that and continue. At some point today, we should be able to start CSS if we have enough time, which I believe we will. So we'll start adding some of that to our assignments. A small recap from yesterday, we did have the states HTML. We went through it and talked about what type of tags we want to use to format our page. Kenny, were you able to follow along with this as well? Okay, awesome. I just want to make sure we're kind of all up to speed. Chase is here too as well. Chase, were you able by any chance to watch the rest of the video yesterday? You are muted.
I watched about half of it, and then I had some work stuff come up that I wasn't to, but I will be finishing it.
Okay, yeah, no problem. Only reason I asked is just to make sure I know where the class is at in the curriculum, so I know if I have to answer additional questions. And if I do not hesitate to ask any questions because chances are that the rest of us we probably haven't really solidified this information yet because we just saw it yesterday. So it's a good recap.
Okay.
But we talked about some tags yesterday. The most commonly used tags. We installed a couple extensions. Um, if you weren't able to get to that chase, the extensions that you want to install onto your computer are going to be as follows. Just take a quick screenshot of this as well so you can install it. There's some extensions that we want to have on our VS Code to make working with HTML documents a little bit more easier, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Um, and one of them, the biggest one, was live server, right? And if you're not familiar with VS Code, on the left side you have your kind of like a hotbar or a toolbar. You want to click on the Tetris blocks that has extensions. You click this, it's going to open up a marketplace, and here you want to type in the name of these applications. Typically, when you install these or any of the extensions that are going to be required for you throughout your cohort, it's typically the one that has the most download. That's the most commonly used extensions. All these other ones are like cheap imitations, that probably do something very similar, but does not really give you the full functionality of what we're looking for. But live server here is going to be your friend, right? When working with HTML documents. With this extension, what that does for you when working with an HTML document, you can right click it and it should give you the option of open with live server. And it should default to whatever you have defaulted on your computer for your default browser. And in mine being Chrome, it opens up a tab or a window if you don't have a window in Chrome, right? And this window here essentially allows you to get a visual representation of what your code is going to look like as you code along. So it's very helpful for the development stage of your application. And I think that's pretty much where we left off yesterday. We talked about the golden separation rule, right, of concerns where we separate our different files. That way we have all of the HTML on one page, all the CSS on a different page, and the JavaScript on a third page. It makes scalability a lot easier and it's a lot more readable, right? You don't want to have a bunch of garbage code all just jumbled up together. Um, we had a couple tags that we talked about, and there's one specific category of tags that we did not touch upon that, and that's going to be the semantic tags. That should be here in the README. Once again, this README here, I have not uploaded on the repo for FOP. This was a work in progress, which is why it's not on there. But I'm still going to use this during the class so we can follow along on what my intent was. Where we talked about a little bit about divs, right? And divs share something very similar to semantic tags. right? A semantic tag is similar to divs, but unlike divs, they are very generic. We just use them as a form of a box to categorize or different tags. Semantic tags have very specific names. They're essentially just honestly at their nitty gritty, they're just divs, but they're called differently to give you as the developer an idea of what's supposed to be inside of this specific tag, right? During my HTML example, we talked about separating these into divs. Actually, it wasn't this example. I think it was the other HTML document. This one here, HTML underscore example, right? This is the page that I used to demonstrate all the tags. We create some divs here, and these divs, they essentially contain different parts of our page. And if I open this with live server, we can kind of see this, right? We had the div that was holding all the headers with like some titles, whatever, and then we have a different div that's supposed to hold our lists. Um, and that's essentially what we just did here. We had a div that had the header example, right? Everything that involved the header was put inside this one div, essentially just categorizing our tags into one specific area so we know where they belong in the hierarchy. And then we created a separate div for the list example, right? And this specific div here only has lists, right? Um, so we're able to kind of just isolate them in their own respective uh, location. Well, semantic tags do something very similar to that, but instead of a very generic name like div that doesn't really say much to us, we have other divs that can give you a much better idea of what's supposed to be within these tags, right? And here we have some quick examples, and there are a bunch of other ones. Uh, one of them being the nav tag, right? It defines the navigation links. So if you wanted to have a toolbar, let's say if we go back to that BBC website we visited yesterday, um, everything that's on this nav bar right here at the very top that's supposed to help us navigate through the page, this will all be in one specific div called the nav div, right? The nav tag. So that's a good time or a good situation when you might want to use a semantic tag, right? And you have a section for an article, right? Like for example, this part right here, this might be a semantic tag of an article, right? Because this is a specific box or a div that contains the title, the picture, the link, and the description to a very specific article. So this might want to be an article tag. I'm sorry, misspoke, right? Sections defines a thematic grouping of content, right? So if you have a specific theme on a specific location on your application, you might want to use a section. We talked about article, and that's honestly what the rest of these are: headers, footers, asides. It it relates to what the content of that specific section of your application is going to be holding. That's when you want to use these tags. Now you're not limited to these. You're not restricted to these. You don't have to use these. There's no hard set rule like, hey, this is an article, my guy. It has to be an article tag. No, this is more up for you, right? It gives you more range of options of what type of tags to use to better format your HTML document. Um, and the reason for that is because chances are that you're going to be working with a group of other software engineers. You're not going to be the only person working on this application. And it just helps everybody know what's supposed to go in this specific section, right? So developers, it helps us know how to, hierarch our different tags. I have a little table here that talks a little bit about the difference between divs and semantic tags, right? So divs, they don't have any specific meaning. Semantic tags do. The purpose for divs is grouping and styling, right? You can style everything that is as one specific div. You just pass in a specific class name to this div, and then you can format this div, and it should format everything within that div, right? Um, for semantic tags, the purpose for that is structuring content semantically, right? It has a specific meaning for it. And then here is something that you probably some of you might have heard before is SEO, which stands for search engine optimization. I almost forgot the abbreviation. Search engine optimization. And what that means is the way that you format your HTML document actually impacts how much traffic you might get on your application, right? If you made a trash website with some trash code and really bad HTML, formatting, and you use the wrong tags, um, the way that these search engines like Google and Bing and I don't know other ones, right? Like I think Yahoo, is that still a thing? I don't know. Like these search engines, the way that they figure out what is the most what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, English is my second language, so I forget some words. But what they display to you on a search engine is going to be dictated by how the application was built. For example, if I want to look for cats, right? Uh, the websites that I get that pop up, the way that this appears at the very top in comparison to what's at the very bottom is going to depend a lot on how the application is built, right? So if it's a garbage website, chances are you're going to find yourself at the very end of the search engine's page, right? So that's what search engine optimization is. There's a specific art that actually goes into it on how to optimize your application to ensure that you are on the front page of these search engines. And divs and semantic tags do play a part in that, right? Divs don't really have much of an impact, but semantic tags do have a very positive impact on that, on um, how popular your website might be and how accessible is it for other people to reach your website or stumble upon it, right? Uh, if you guys ever have your own business and you decide to hire a software engineer, that's probably something that you would want to think about if you have your own business, right? If Chase here wants to start a business and sell a bunch of slime. I don't know that I hear that's a new trend, right? People selling slime on TikTok. They create their little Etsy stores. But he might want to hire a someone that specializes on search engine optimization, and they would show up and they would take their website that they already have, and they specialize on reformatting their website to ensure they get it to the top of the search engine. So that's an actual thing. And one of the ways they do that is by the fact that they have to use more specific semantic tags. Another thing that plays a big part actually as well is this doc type in the formatting. So the way that we teach you guys for the course is it's how it's supposed to be done. There are some other tips and tricks that you can look into of how to optimize your website. But I just wanted to point that out to make sure that you guys are aware that is a concept and a thing. And the other thing with divs and semantic tags is the code readability, right? Once again, divs don't really tell you anything. You just have a bunch of divs, bunch of boxes everywhere. It doesn't really say too much, but semantic tags do, right? You know what is holding the articles, where's your navbar, where's your footer. So it does make your HTML document a little bit more readable as a developer. Here is supposed to be the final product of the states.html document. If you guys want to come look at it, right? We use semantic tags to refactor some of the things in our HTML page, like the footer. That's where we ended up putting the link to the website for Platoon, and so on and so forth. I even have the Platoon logo here if you guys want to go back and try to work around with the semantic tags and experiment with them. You can definitely try that out and refactor that states.html document that we worked on. All right, let's go ahead and continue. One thing that I did not cover was the form, and this is probably a good tag to mess around with and show you in class. Let's go ahead and do this, and let's mess around with it. So here's my HTML example file that I was working with yesterday during the class. A very common tag that I did not cover yesterday that I do want to cover is going to be the form tag. And the form is honestly exactly what it sounds like when you guys maybe fill out a job application or you apply to something or you're filling out a sign up form. Uh, in the engine right underneath the hood um, of this website, where you're adding all this input of your information, it's being added into a form, right? And as you see here, there's nothing here that populated the moment I put form, but it's supposed to be able to, um, where if you add some kind of functionality to this form tag, everything that's nested within it, it'll take that information. And then within this form, you want to add what we call the input tags, right? And notice that the moment I added an input tag, it's added this little input box. And this is how we create those little uh, boxes to add information. And right now it's not very formatted because there's no CSS here, so everything's just online. Maybe if I add a break, it'll look better. Yeah, there we go. Now, this is not how you want to do it, but because I haven't taught you CSS yet, I don't want to show it to you yet. But here we have the input tags. The input tags take a specific attribute, and I believe the attribute is type. And you can do something like button, and you see how it changes the type of input it is. I think one is drop down. No, let me see. Let's do a quick Google search. I don't know all the types off memory. One of my favorite websites to use is W3 Schools. This is actually a very helpful website. You can learn a little bit about everything in here. It shows you basic stuff. If you go to W3 Schools and visit HTML, it should bring you to this page here, and we can go to the different types of tags. Let's see, HTML form. Here we go. HTML forms. It shows you how forms are built using the form tag and then the input element. And here we go. Here we have some examples, right? Type of text, radio, checkbox, submit, so on and so forth. Let's use these to mess around. Let's try the radio, which should be a circle, I believe. There you go. You have that circle input. We have a submit. That's another good one. And it should just be a submit button. Yeah. And you can just use a regular button as well. But yeah, definitely try out W3 Schools. It's very useful. But I want to make sure I showed you guys the form in real time so you guys saw how that worked. Um, and once you create all these different inputs, let's just go ahead and add text on these. Um, Text, right? And even though it defaults to text, it's still good practice to um, deliberately add what type of input it's supposed to be so that people can read it. The way this form works is once you add all the input boxes, you make a specific input for submit. And what's going to happen is you add some kind of function using JavaScript, where when you click on the submit button, it takes all the information within this form and it retrieves it. And then you can kind of save it to some form of variable. And we're going to see that when we enter it to JavaScript. And then you use the information that's given into these input tags to do whatever you want to do, like either log in a user, sign somebody up, or apply for something. If you are creating a form to create a playlist, write the name of the playlist and stuff like that, you can do a variety of things with this form. But to summarize, the form is a tag that's able to receive information from your user, which you can then collect and do something else with that information. All right. That's how those are working. I think I can show you with my website. We go to cyberhire.net. in here, let me go ahead and open the inspect tool. And maybe I haven't really talked about what this inspect tool is, but these are almost like developer tools, right? These are going to be very useful for the remainder of the course, as well as when you go into the either the immersive program, DevOps, or evening weekend, whatever one you end up doing. Um, this is what's going to help you navigate your what's called a DOM, which we'll talk about later. But this can allow you to mess around with the application that's on your browser. If I open up login here, uh, I can open up this body, open up the page, and if I go into the login div, it should lead me to a form somewhere. And here you see it, sign-in form, right? So I created a sign-in form. It has a couple inputs. Notice I have the input type is email, password, and then there's a button here, right? There is a specific button tag that you can make, and then the type of that button is the submit button. And that's how that works. There is a function on this. I think if I click it, it might show me. Let's see if I can find it somewhere around here. It should show me the functionality for it. See if I can find it. Performance, no. Mm, I don't think I can see the way this works, which I mean makes sense. Event listeners. We'll talk more about event listeners later on. But event listeners is what your browser is listening for when stuff happens. And the event can be something as simple as clicking a button, right? This button should have an event listener, like, where's it at? Input, no, key press, key down, key up, right? So we can listen to specific things that happen on our application. And depending on the action that happens, we can have a reaction. And I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but yeah, so hopefully you guys get the understanding of the form and the input tags. And then everything else we kind of talked about here. Article is semantic tag. We have the anchor tag, paragraph. Span is another type of semantic tag for short pieces of text instead of using a paragraph, right? These are exactly pretty much the same thing, but span is semantic, right? All right. We talked about the HTML structure yesterday already. We talked about the head section that has the settings and the description of your page, and then the actual body that's supposed to hold all the content of your application, and all this is put within that one HTML tag at the top. But all right, so I mentioned to you guys yesterday as well that today we will be doing the student practice. All right, so we have the brownies.html. This should be on your repo. It should be in the lesson 2 intro to HTML. Let's go ahead and kind of talk through it real quick to ensure we all understand the intent of the assignment. Here we have brownies.html, and it's just a bunch of text, right? There's no tags here. Your goal for this assignment, there's really no right or wrong answer. I mean, to a certain extent, there is a right answer, but you have flexibility to choose what tags you want to use. The goal for you guys is to take this text document and format it into an HTML document that looks like what it should be if it was a real website, right? So right now, when I open it with Live Server, notice that it's just a bunch of text. So I want you guys to take this text and start formatting this using all the tags that we talked about. And if you have some other tags that you might have encountered that you want to try out, I encourage it. But use all the tags that we covered to have an idea of how you should list things out. For example, right, just looking at this here, ingredients. This might be some kind of a header, maybe like an H6, or I could just bold it, right? You guys can look into how to bold a tag. And this looks like a list of ingredients. I don't think there has any specific order, so this might be an unordered list, right? But then we also have another part here that's directions. This probably sounds like something you might actually want to do in a specific step order. So this might be an ordered list. So going through your text, I want you to format this HTML document. Um, and we're gonna do this in our two teams of two, right? I'm gonna break you guys off. We'll take about 15 minutes to give this a try, and then we'll come back, and then one of you guys can just demonstrate what you guys were able to achieve. Once again, there's no right or wrong answer. I encourage you guys to please keep your cameras on and collaborate. Yesterday, when I was going to the rooms, we had a lot of cameras off and stuff. Try to help out your buddy and talk. Right, this is what's going to be expected from you guys once you guys start the immersive program, DevOps or evening weekend. You're going to be broken off into groups, maybe groups of 3 or 4. You'll get a bunch of group time. You'll have pair programming days where you'll get with a buddy and you'll be coding for hours. So it's important that we start getting into that rhythm and trying to collaborate with each other without being shy. Let me go ahead and stop the recording real quick. All right, welcome back, everybody. Uh, do I have a volunteer for their progress on the brownies.html? Doesn't have to be complete. Whatever you guys got, if you want to show, maybe we can talk about what else we can add to it.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, it's kind of like we didn't have a whole lot of time, so it's like whatever
That's
I
okay.
could, wing in 15 minutes.
Yeah, and of course, let's see it.
Okay. Oops. Yeah, it's just this right now.
Okay, yeah. Uh, are you able to split your screen from left and right so we can see the code and see your browser?
Um, I mean, I could just fudge it. I mean, so you can see
If
my
you
code.
press with the you have Windows. I'm not sure how you do it.
I
I
have a Mac. I have a Mac
Mac, yeah,
machine.
my bad. On Windows, if you press the Windows key and the left and right arrows,
Oh,
it lets you format it to how you want it. I don't know if you guys have a key like that. I don't use Mac.
yeah.
But okay, yeah, let's see. You have your deep dish brownies as your title, so that's an H1, which is perfectly fine. That seems to be the focal point here, right? This is the title. You added the image for the brownies. I'm assuming you found this on Google.
Yeah, I
Pretty
just Googled
good.
for an image of brownies.
Yep. I like how you added the alternate attribute there in case the picture broke. And then we have an H3 for recipe by Biz Mac Mahone. Okay. And then related recipes. Something that we can do um, is instead of using H5 for line 12 on related recipes, why don't you change the H5 to a B?
What do you mean a B?
So remove the H5 and put the letter B. And this should make it bold instead of a header. I'm not saying this is wrong or anything or this is better. I just want to show you how instead of using the header tag, we can use the bold tag. So remove the H5, yep, and then put a B, and then same thing with the closing tag.
Like that?
Correct. Refresh your page. I think I don't know. It's being weird. Okay. Yeah, so it looks
Yeah.
like the B and the H5 share a very similarity on their size and boldness. But
Hmm.
yeah, you can reach the same kind of outcome with the bold tag. And this tag
Hmm.
is literally what it says. It just boldens your text, especially if you have a specific word in your paragraph that you want to make sure that catches the attention of the reader. You can bold it out. Okay, and then we have our unordered list, and you're listing out the different items.
Sorry, real quick, could I use a span tag, like if I wanted, to make this bold? Is
Uh,
that what span does?
Span, it's very similar to the paragraph tag, but when you think about a paragraph, think back to elementary grammar, right? When you were writing, or not even elementary, like middle school, you're writing essays. a paragraph tends to be an average of like 5 sentences. Um, and it has like a specific meaning for that paragraph that we're trying to convey a small message, right? Minimum of 5 sentences, if you remember what your teachers would tell you. Spans are typically something for like a sentence to 3 sentences, give or take. It's just something, it's like a small amount of text, a small varied description. So that's the semantic meaning for a span. So I wouldn't necessarily use a span here for this little title. The bold works just as fine, or on what you did before with H5 or H6 works perfect too.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing we have here is the prep time, right? So what kind of tag do we think we should put on the prep time?
Yeah, I mean, I just didn't make it that far. I pretty
No,
much made
I
it the
understand.
list. Yeah.
We're just building off on this on what you got. Um, so what would you use here?
I mean, I guess some other kind of header.
Yeah, probably another H5, right? Another H5 or H6.
Yeah.
I would say H5. Uh, and then we have servings, and then it's 9 as well. So maybe another H5, or we can bold this out. We can bold prep time and servings, either or. It don't matter. But
Mm-hmm.
we know it's a specific section here on our application. Then the ingredients. This is an ordered, or I'm sorry,
Yeah.
it's an unordered list.
Mm-hmm.
Directions. Okay. But yeah, so definitely on your break, continue working on this. Did anybody get any farther ahead than Jason?
Yeah, I made a little bit further.
All right, let's see it, Tim. Oh, right on. Tim, you are muted and we can't see your browser, but I'm assuming you're trying to show your VS Code.
No, I was just trying to show the browser.
Okay.
So I did an unordered list for the ingredients, and then just an H3 tag for directions for another section, followed by an ordered list, and then a footer down here. But I'll show you the VS Code. You still see the...
We're seeing VS Code.
Okay.
If you wanted to, oh, okay. Can we see your browser? It looks like you did a lot. I would like to see your browser.
What do you see now?
Still VS Code.
All right.
You might have just shared VS Code
Oh, yeah.
when you shared your
Perhaps.
screen.
So I'll stop sharing and reshare. Browser. There it is. Is that better?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Awesome. It looks pretty good. Very good formatting. I like how you bolded out the tip there for aluminum foil can be used to keep food moist and so on and so forth. And then find this recipe. Is that an active link? Did you actually put a hyperlink there?
Yeah.
Oh, right on. Okay. All right, good stuff, Tim. Yeah, it's looking good. The only comment I have on your code, we can definitely add some semantic tags here. For example, on the ingredients, that could be a specific section. The part where we're showing other recipes, that could be a different section. Put them in this, or some kind of semantic tag. But besides that, looking pretty solid. All right, right on. I'm gonna go ahead
Yeah,
and
I was about to say, I felt like I was kind of like moving through it like a grandma a little bit, like, trying to remember, how things are supposed to look as far as like, the syntax and everything.
no, you're good. We all learn at different paces, so good stuff. As long as you understand the concept, it's okay if you guys take it a little bit slow. It's a learning, progress. The next assignment that we're gonna do, and then this assignment will also tie into our break. It's gonna be the BBC example, right? So you guys already saw me kind of open it up earlier. Here we have a screenshot from like I want to say this like 2-3 years ago. So this is very outdated. Um, but the intent of this, because if you check your VS Code, I believe it should be an empty file. If not, it's not even in here, I think. Yeah, I don't see BBC. I only see the PNG. So what you have to do is in this directory, the intro to HTML, I want you to create a new file, right? And just call it your bbc.html or BBC HTML example or whatever you want to call it, BBC News. And you are going to essentially try to create the BBC website. You can use, if you like, the modern version of the website, or you can stick to the PNG file that's on here and use this as an example to try to recreate it. Whatever one you want to do is fine. Now, I don't expect this to be perfect because obviously we don't have CSS, so formatting all these boxes here, it won't be perfect. If anything, it's going to look very, very awkward, but that's okay. The point is to kind of experiment with the tags and specifically the semantic tags to figure out how you would format the different sections within this page. And that's honestly what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for something visually appealing when you open it up on live server. I want to see on your HTML were you able to successfully categorize the different parts of your HTML into a specific tag that it shares some kind of reference to, right? So if you create a navbar, these different tags here should be on their own, and it should be in the nav tag. This should be like a whole like home screen page. You should have like a welcome div with some articles in there, have a news div, and so on and so forth. But your the intent is to recreate this website to the best of your belief, not with CSS, but just with the HTML, right? So don't worry about the fact that it won't look like this. What's important is that your HTML reflects something very similar to what this looks like, right? We're gonna take a little bit longer than we did with the other one, because this one takes a little bit more thought process. So the time is 6:21. I want you guys to take until 6:41. You'll take 20 minutes. At 6:41, go on your 10-minute break, and we're gonna come back at 6:51. So ideally, you have 20 minutes to work on this. If you don't go on too long of a break and add more time to this, then we'll come back and we'll get another example here and see what you guys were able to come up with. Let me go ahead and pause the recording. All right, welcome back, everybody. Does anybody want to volunteer and demonstrate their assignment?
I mean, I can show mine. It's nowhere near complete. Maybe not done as you meant for it to be, but
Okay. Yeah, let's see it.
So okay, share the screen. What was that? So this is kind of where I was at. Pull up the bring this. It's kind of that. So I still haven't obviously like figured out some other stuff. Whoa. Let me figure out how to get out of this.
It's okay. Yeah, it takes a little messing around with so you get comfortable with it.
Messages. That. That. So it's kind of just the code I was like doing. Let's say this is like the title, and then going down. So I was gonna do different sections here. I was gonna do a nav. Obviously I couldn't quite get it to be like that or like this up here, with that bar and whatnot. But I did get them like listed out. I don't know if I technically did that correct because I don't know if you're not really supposed to use bullet points for that. And then going to here, I was gonna basically try to create its own chunk of like basically following this BBC one. The China COVID stuff have its own little chunk of stuff with article or a little paragraph or short excerpt, and then a sports one and a politics one. And I was gonna try to add photos into them and try to like block them off a little bit better. That's kind of as far as I got. Not very far.
No, it's looking good. Yeah, you can use bullet points for not specific bullet points, but you can use a list for the navbar. That's not bad. Everything's looking pretty good. Slight improvement. Maybe instead of divs, you use a semantic tag for the articles.
Yeah.
But besides that, looking pretty straightforward.
Yeah,
But yeah, that uh-huh.
sorry, I found something on W3 Schools that I used for the nav bar to sort of make it kind of look like, but not really, like the BBC page. But
Yeah, well,
it was more just copying from W3 Schools.
and that's okay. There's a lot of stuff that I'm not going to teach here on the course. Once again, to reiterate, it's to kind of get your feet wet prior to the course, so you guys have somewhat of an understanding. So when you guys go into the course itself, it's easier to grasp. But even as well, the course, whether it's the immersive program, DevOps, whether you're doing the evening weekend one, um, there is so much content on everything, whether it's HTML, Python, JavaScript, the different stacks like Django, React, that you will not learn everything in the course, right? We teach you everything you need to know to get from point A to point B, but there's different ways to achieve the same outcome. And you encounter that throughout your research, right? When you get these assignments, when you go into your personal projects, you're gonna encounter different things that you might encounter on Stack Overflow, on some kind of GitHub repo. If you look on YouTube, you'll see other people doing it in other ways, which is not bad or wrong, right? There's different ways of doing things, and part of that is doing your own research and seeing what you can find at with these different resources that you might have. W3 Schools being one. So uh, don't knock what you did when it came to W3 Schools. That's yeah, it's common practice to find some code and see how it works, and then you just add a new tool to your tool belt. But yeah, definitely, if you want to share, Jason, that would be good too. What did you find? What could you share with us? Okay, looking pretty close. All right, I like the date. What does they look like in your code?
Oh, you see it?
Yes, I can. Yeah, you have the anchor points with the text. Um, this is somewhat of a mixture of what it would look like in real life. If you're using React, there's a different way of doing this, but they're very, very similar to this. But yeah, it looks pretty cool. I see you added a class. You guys might not know exactly what these classes are yet. There's actually functionality that goes behind this attribute class, which we will talk about uh, in this next lesson. But uh, there's actual functionality that goes into the classes, and we'll discuss that. But yeah, that's pretty nice. Good job, Jason. Good job, Chase. And that was pretty much the intent of the assignment, just kind of practicing with these different tags and figuring out what scenario might be more fitting for the specific tag that you want to use. So good stuff. Let me go ahead and continue with today's lecture. Let me go ahead and open up my screen. All right, well, that concludes the BBC example. I encourage you guys, if you want some more practice with HTML, you can continue doing this. Go back to the brownies or even the states and add more to it, right? Honestly, your only limit is your imagination. But up to this point, you have somewhat of a foundation on different HTML, the tags, how to set up an HTML document. And we're going to go ahead and continue building off on that with the next lesson. But before we move on, do I have any other questions about what has been taught from yesterday to today?
Yeah, I have a question.
Let's hear it, Tim.
When I start my live server, regardless of what file I'm actually working in VS Code, if I open with live server and then open in browser, it goes to my root lesson for Foundations of Programming for the GitHub repo that I downloaded, that I cloned. It goes to the very root folder of that, and I have to navigate to the actual page I'm looking for. Is there a way to fix that?
Yeah, so if we go to the live server, and it's gonna be in the settings, right? So you go to your live server, you can go into where's it at? Right here, I think. Settings. You should have something very similar to this, and there's a couple things that you can navigate in here, and how it's supposed to work. You can set the default browser that you want to use, the host, and so on and so forth. So to get a better understanding of your situation, would you mind sharing your screen so I can see exactly how that's working and see how I
Sure.
can fix it?
Sure.
And that's a good point because you're not the first and you won't be the last person that's encountered this issue. I've seen it multiple times throughout other classes. But let's go ahead and do it. Can
All
you
right.
open with live server?
So open a live server, open a browser, and then are you still seeing yeah, you're still seeing VS Code.
Yes.
It goes here.
Can you share the browser again? You can't see it.
Hold on. So it opens to this page. And then I have to navigate and try and figure out.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's what it is opening the default. We're gonna have to go to settings for sure. Let's see. Continue sharing your screen, and I want you to go to the settings for live server.
Wrong page. Go.
Yeah, go to live server, click on that, open up the widget on the very top next to auto update. You see where right below that,
Don't. Oh, okay.
and then go to settings. And then here we will have to do some kind of manipulating. I'm using mine to kind of get a better idea of how to set yours up. Right here, first and foremost, let's try to see if we can change this to your specific browser, whichever browser you're using.
It's not listed. I'm using Brave,
Brave, okay. That might
which
be
is it's a Chrome. It's basically a fork of Chrome.
try Chrome. I will say for those of you guys who are using live server, Chrome is going to be your best friend. Chrome tends to work the best when it comes to using live server, and the development tools. So we have Chrome. Let's see, scroll down a little bit more. More. Okay, see. Okay. Scroll down a little bit more. All right, hold on. Okay, scroll down a little bit more. Pause. Yep. That might be what it is. Let's see, hold on. How can we fix this? Set custom root of live service. Change the settings of the service. Okay, click that. Okay, here we might have to do some editing. Let me show you. Well, actually, let me look at your stuff while I compare it to mine. Okay, I think it's where it says. I think it's somewhere here. Okay. Work list because true, editor, default formatter. I'm going to copy and paste. I'm gonna send something to you.
Okay.
I want you to copy and paste what you have there, your settings, and save it on a notepad, right? Just in case it doesn't work, we can come back and put it back to its default settings. And then on Slack, I'm going to private message you or direct message you something. Because sometimes when you send things on Zoom, it can be in the wrong format. But I direct message you the
Yep.
settings that I have. Try using those settings. We're gonna have to probably change something specifically here, which is gonna be the where's it at? Uh, we're gonna have to change this part right here. The default
Okay.
interpreter path. Let's see how we can fix that. Second. Mm,
I don't know if this is related, but one mistake I noticed yesterday was in VS Code, I was opening, essentially from my root directory, and I was pulling up all my files, and I kept getting an error message because it was making VS Code work very hard, pulling everything up. But then I just opened strictly the folder that I wanted. I'm not sure if that would be related to the live server thing, as far as what's going on.
we'll
If you have like
check.
every single file open.
We'll check that in a bit. Type Control Shift P. And then type in select interpreter. Okay, there you go. Press enter. Okay, and then I want you to select this one. And then on your terminal, I want you to type in which Python.
Which Python?
Yeah, which space Python. Press Control C. Okay, something's happening here. Let's open up a new terminal. Press LS, type in LS. I want to see if you can put command in here. Okay. Uh, type in which Python again. If that doesn't work, type in where Python. Command not found. Why are we getting issues? Type in Python space dash dash version. Okay. All right. Let's see if we can find this path here. Type in ls or type in cd. I want you to go up a level, cd dot dot. Type in ls. Cd dot dot again. ls. And then where is it at? Okay. All right, we'll fix this in a little bit on the next
Right.
break, so we don't
Yep.
stop class because I feel like we're going to tangent here. But we have to fix where or how it's going to open it up. I want you to put back the previous settings that you had here.
Yeah.
That you saved into a notepad.
Mhm.
It's definitely the setting that you have configured of what is going to load up for sure. It's just setting it up. Um, uh, uh,
If we just download the extension, why you said like, and like why would his settings be so different? I mean, if all we did was download the extension and leave it at that.
It's how you might have it configured your VS Code or your installation when you went through the process of setting up your virtual machine can sometimes be a little bit different depending on your computer. That's why.
All right. It's not a huge deal. I can navigate using the browser. It's just a little bit annoying.
Yeah,
But
no,
wanna-
I understand.
I don't want to hold up class. Let's just continue.
We'll definitely get it fixed. It's how it's running your live server and where it's grabbing the information. And we have to configure those settings that we were at to point to where you want to open up your stuff at. That's all it is. But we'll get to it in a bit. Okay.
All right.
Let's continue. We'll definitely check it out, Tim. Let's move on. So that's going to conclude the lesson for HTML. So let's go ahead and move on to the next part of our curriculum, which is going to be adding CSS. All right, so CSS, I've already mentioned it before in the introduction to HTML, but CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, right? And it has that name for a very specific reason. And the reason for that is because of how cascading style sheets work, right? So when creating a style sheet, the formatting that your document is going to take is going to depend on what came last. For example, if you have a styling for your H1, right, to be a specific font, but later on in that exact same document, you add another styling for that specific H1 element, the most recent styling that's at the very bottom is going to override any previous styling that you might have had later or earlier on in your document, right? So it kind of cascades as it goes downwards into its documentation, where that's where the cascading comes from. Cascading style sheet allows you to essentially, in the name, style your applications, right? So they don't look as bland as you had your BBC or Brownies HTML documents, right? There's two ways of using your style sheets or styling in general, and one's going to be better than the other, but one is going to be by doing it in line. And what that means is when you are creating your tags, very similar to how we added certain attributes for our tags, like setting the type of input or giving it a class, you can add a specific attribute called style. And then in there, you can type in what style you want to have on your tag. Or the more effective way and the standard way of doing it is to create a specific document that holds the styling for your tags and then linking that style page to your HTML document. And the way you do that, it's demonstrated here on this piece of code by setting it in your header, right? You see here in the head tag, there is a link tag, and I believe the REL stands for relation of this type of document you're trying to link to your HTML. And notice that we assign it style sheet, right? So it's aware of what type of document we're trying to link to it. And then the other attribute you add on the link tag is going to be the reference to where this style sheet is located at, right? And because it's supposed to be in a similar directory of where your HTML document is, you should just be able to put style.css to be able to link it. Now, if for whatever reason you have your HTML document in one folder and your style sheet in a different folder, then you have to put the file path to get to that document. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. The syntax for CSS differs a little bit from HTML, right? CSS syntax, once again, syntax being the grammar of the language, starts with a selector, right? The selector is what you want to style. You can style a tag directly, right? Or you can use a class and assign it to a tag. That way you only style the specific tag that holds that class name. And we'll talk about other ways of doing that. But here in this example, the style they're adding is to the paragraph tag. So this specific style right here is going to format every single p tag that your HTML document has, right? And that is demonstrated here with the selector. After declaring the selector you want to style, you open and close curly braces. And within these curly braces, you add the style that you want to format. Here, they're setting the color for the p tag to red, right? And it's separated by a colon. The item to the left of the colon is known as the property. So what you want to change, whether you want to change the color, the font, the margin, the border, right? That's your property. And then the item to the right of that colon is the value that you want to set to this property, right? So you want to make the color to red. If you want to make the margin to 50 pixels, if you want to make the font to bold, and that's pretty much the way that you would set that up, right? And this right here together is called the declaration. Do I have any questions on the basic syntax for a style? You're going to see that this is pretty much the same with everything else that you do with CSS, with some differences and exceptions for other specific styles, but we'll get to those. But this is the basic way of doing it and the standard, essentially. How to read CSS, as mentioned to you before at the start of this lesson, it's read from top to bottom, right? What comes further down in the page can overwrite what comes before it. So if you styled the H1 header at the very top and then you added a different styling for the same H1 header at the very bottom, what comes at the very bottom is going to override the previous style that you had set. This is what's called a cascade, right? Thus the name cascading style sheets. Look at this example here. We have two different styles for the same p tag, right? On the first style, we have color being set to red and the font weight being set to bold. And then we have another style for the same p tag, but this time the color is blue. What do you think is going to be the end output for this p tag? What color will this p tag be?
Bold blue.
Yeah, it's going to be bold and it's going to be the color blue, right? The bold didn't get overridden. That wasn't set again here. The second time it was declared. But the blue was, right? Even though we set red before, because the P came after the first declaration, the blue is what's being set as the final say of what the color should be. Let me open up our VS Code here. Once again, this is a lesson that you won't find Did I mistakenly put the wrong one? No, this is HTML, my bad. We're on lesson 3. Sorry, give me a second. Cascading style sheets. All right, so we talked about what is CSS. It's essentially just a styling language that controls the appearance of your HTML elements. That's all it is used for, nothing else. It doesn't do any kind of functionality. It doesn't create elements. All it is literally just style, right? We talked about inline styles, which are applied directly within the HTML element, and they have the highest precedence. And we'll talk more about what precedence is and specificity. But when it refers to precedence, it's referring to what takes priority. So what that means is if you have a p tag on your HTML document and you have inline style within that tag, but you have style on a separate CSS page, what's going to take effect is what is within that inline style. This takes the highest precedence. So we try to avoid this as much as possible because it's very hard to override this later on in your project using a CSS document. And I'll show you that in action in a little bit. Internal styles defined with the style tag. This is different than the link tag, right? So there's two ways of linking your a style sheet. You can set a specific section in your head where you can add all these styles, but this is not very commonly used. Once again, because back to the golden rule, we want separation of concern. So we want to have a specific different document where we add all these styling and then we connect it using the link tag. And then the other type of CSS that you have is your browser defaults, right? And you saw that during the HTML examples, we had no type of styling, but we were still able to add some text there. It was ugly, plain, just simple black and white. That is the default that your browser provides because we didn't have any styling. So it needs to have some way to demonstrate it or showcase that CS or that tag to us, right? So there is a default that comes with the browser. So whenever we add CSS, we're essentially just overriding all of this. It's used to style your HTML elements with different colors, fonts, or layouts, right? So when you see like the BBC website, you saw all these different boxes and different sides and shapes and angles, right? That's all CSS, right? And you saw that when you tried to recreate it, everything was kind of just going from top to bottom because there was no CSS. To actually format things on your web page, that's the actual styling of the page itself. HTML is a skeleton and the CSS is the appearance. Right back to the demonstration from HTML, we talked about the difference between HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML was the skeleton. CSS was the skin or the visual appearance of that person demonstration I showed you guys, and the JavaScript was the functionality. We talked about selectors and declaration blocks, right? Here's another example of how that works. Here you have your H1 element. We have the open and closed curly braces, and within these braces, we have the declaration block with the different properties and the property values, right? We're setting the color for this H1 tag to blue and the size of the font to 24 pixels. As we continue with this class, we're going to cover the most commonly used styling. I want you guys to know that there's so much, there's a huge range of styles out there that we do not have the time to cover every single one of them. We'll talk about the most commonly used ones so you have an idea of how to mess around with them. If you want to be a subject matter expert at styles, you can do your own research. But there are specific roles for this, right? When you decide to get a job, right, we teach a full stack program, but everyone that graduates, let me rephrase that. Not everybody that graduates decide to go down the full stack route. Right, some people decide, hey, you know what? I really hate the back end. I really enjoy just styling websites. So they take more of a front end role and they focus on the the actual page itself and how they look. While others hate all that, and they decide to focus more on back end and just the data and the actual nitty gritty of how the application is working. So you'll see that sometimes back end developers are not very good with front end because they specialize on the back end. Front ends are not that good with the back end because they specialize with the front end, and the full stacks tend to be the jack of all trades where they're not really specifically, subject matter experts on either, but they can do a pretty much a variety of everything. And that's kind of what we're teaching you guys here to be able to be a jack of all trades to handle each part of the actual process. And if you decide to specialize on one and take a specific role for that, you definitely can, and then focus on that for the rest of your career if you like. We talked about the CSS syntax. Here we see another example. And then the ways to apply the CSS, right? Inline styling, here's the very first example for that. Here is the P tag. And inside we have the content that this is a styled paragraph. And notice that they add the attribute style. They open and close some quotation marks. And they separate the different types of styles with a semicolon. Still very similar syntax to how you would if you were doing it in a CSS file, but the difference is it's in line with the tag itself within the open tab, right? And you can see how this can become very messy very quickly, right? If you did this to every single tag on your document and you had multiple styles, this will just expand the left and right limits of your page, and it can become very difficult to read. This specific styling here has the highest level of precedence. So if you have this style here in the tag itself and you have a different document with a different type of style, this will trump the CSS documents, right? Because this takes precedence over everything else. So you want to avoid doing this unless it's a very specific tag that you want to have a very specific styling in it. The internal CSS, we talked about using the header to add a tag very similar to this, where you can open up a little section, right? This would be within your head of your HTML document, and you can open up a section and start adding CSS very similar to how you would in your CSS document, but this is all within your HTML document. Once again, not a very good way of doing it. This is still, I see it commonly used as well, but it's not the best practice, right? So you might not want to do this. Every time I see a YouTube video involving, some kind of person coding some kind of program, if you look at the comments, everyone's always talking about maybe make a separate file for this. Like, hey, this is not a really good practice because it's not, right? It clutters your code. It just does not look neat. Will it work? Yes, of course, absolutely. But when it comes to working with others, it just makes your code look very messy and crowded. Here's the way that we're going to be doing things and how you should do things from here on out. You add a link tag to your head where you link the style sheet. All right. Continue on with the slideshow. We have some common colors when it comes to styling. And you've probably seen this already in the pre-work, but there's different ways to define a color when it comes to your application. Right here, we have different tags. The tags themselves don't have any specific relation to the example. The point of the example is the value here within our properties, right? Notice that the first example here, we have the color, and they use just the word of the color itself of red to get the color red, right? This is one way of doing it, a very basic, simple way and straightforward way of doing it is adding the color. But notice that this already limits you, right? You're limited to colors that have a very specific name. There's a wide range of colors that have a specific name to them that you can use. But if you wanted to get a specific tint of a color, you would have to be a little bit more specific with the declaration. And we see that with the other three examples. The second one is the hex value, which uses the hashtag, the two numbers in the front, and then the range of values with between 0 and I believe 9, and it takes 4 of these. Now, I'm not gonna act like I know a specific color off the top of my head, right? I don't think you guys either. But if you want to look up a chart or a list to show all the different combinations, you definitely can. But just know that this is one way of doing it. The other one is the RGBA. Very similar to how the word or the acronym is worded. RGB standing for red, green, blue. That's where the value or the level for that would be here on your numbers, right? So you type in RGBA and open and close parentheses. The first three values represent the red, the green, and the blue. And then you set those values to get a combination. That fourth number, I forgot what the A stands for, but it's something very similar to like opacity, I think. It's from 0 to 1, I believe is what it is. Something like opacity. I forgot the exact name for it. But typically, you have like either 0 or 1 on this, depending on I think it's how dark. Let me just look it up real quick. I'm pretty sure it's opacity. RGBA. What does the A stand for? It is alpha. My bad. right? Transparent to opaque, right? So 0 being transparent, 1 being opaque. So you can definitely set that. That is an option. If you want just a normal one, you put 0.5, right? Semi-transparent. And then you have the HSLA. I rarely have ever really seen this. I'm not even too familiar of how these work, but just know that these are one of your options. I recommend to just stick to one of these, probably the hex or the RGBA. For you guys who are just starting off, you can use words to keep it very simple. But these tend to be the ones that you'll see most frequently. And you do have different extensions that you can use. On your browser, if you have Chrome, you can get Chrome extensions that allow you to use color pickers or stuff like that to figure out certain colors very easily, or the actual code for it. Or you can just do a quick Google search. But it's not something that you should really stress too much about unless you're just focusing strictly on working on styling your web page, which isn't a big part of the actual process of building your application. Just know that these are the 4 different common ways of changing your color.
I guess what I'm reading says alpha pretty much varies from 0 to 1.
Correct.
0.0 to 1.0. 0.0 being completely transparent, 1.0 and
Correct.
you can see it, completely.
Correct, Jason. Yeah, it's just from 0 to 1 value. Changing fonts. There's different ways of changing your font. The first way and the most common way to do it is the second example here, where you do something like font family and you add a default. So there's some default that come with CSS. You see here like source Sans Pro. This isn't actually the default one, but you would add a like Calibri, I think, or Times New Roman or something very similar to that. Everything that comes after the first one are defaults. In the event the browser the person is using does not support this specific font, or if the font that you're importing isn't working, you can add defaults that your application would resort to in the event the first option isn't available. You can import different fonts. Google has a wide variety of these. We can see a quick demo of that. If we go to Google Fonts, we'll do this as well in class, but you can go to Google Fonts, and you can either search for them or whatnot, or filter through. But you can come through here and you can see a wide range of them. I'll just click on a random one, like this one right here, Merriweather. When you click it, it gives you different variations of it. Light 300, italic, regular 400, italic, bold 700 italic. You can get all these fonts. Essentially, you would choose what you want to get, and you could choose how big of pixels they are. You can put a demonstration here. This is my font to see how it's going to look like. Like, for example, if you were styling your brownies page, brownies recipe, and you're looking for a specific font, you can see how it will look like. When you're ready to use it, you're going to press Get Font. And then it should bring you here. This is from my previous example. Let me go ahead and delete this. Get fonts. When you're ready to use this, you can get the embedded code, and it'll give you the example of how it will look like. If you were trying to link it in the header like the example, you would just copy and paste this and put it directly into your header, or you can copy this and put it into your CSS. You also have the options to filter out which ones you want here. If you only wanted the light 300, this is all you needed for that. So this is a good way to use from fonts that you don't have directly accessible to you via the defaults of CSS. You also have different options on whether you're working with Android, iOS. I don't know what Flutter is, but yeah, linking it or if you're importing it. But we're just gonna be focusing on links and stuff. So that's how you work with the fonts. All right, let's go ahead and go back to the README. I'm now working on lesson 03. I'm going to go ahead and create a file that we can use to mess around with. Let me get to the location. I'm going to, let's copy our example from states. And I'm going to bring it into our lesson 03. Right here. Oh, this is not styled at all. I guess I'll use the where's it at? Is it not the right one? Oh, my bad. I was using the wrong one. The wrong VS Code. Sorry, I have multiple VS Codes open up for some reason. All right. Let's copy. There we go. We can copy this and put it in lesson 03. I copied the wrong one. All right. So now that we have that in here, let me also put this to the side so we can see as we go. And let me open this up on live server. Okay, so this is how our document looks like, right? No CSS whatsoever. We're going to talk through some of these commonly used ones. And let's talk about linking it first. So we talked about inline CSS, and we can try that out. Here is my H1. If I wanted to change this H1 element, let me put this here. I would add the attribute for style. And then if I wanted to change the font size, I could add 50 pixels. And we see here that it changes my fonts, right? And that's exactly how you would do the inline styling. But this can become very, very complex the more I add in here. If I do color to blue, it changes my font. And then if I want to have something else, we can say font weight. Let's say bold, or can I say italic? Say lighter, because I think it's already bold is H1. There we go, lighter, right? And the more I add in here, the messier it's going to get. Now imagine this for every single tag that's in here. It can become very disorienting to be able to look at your tags. This isn't really ideal, not really the way I wanted to do it. So the best way of doing it is to utilize your head tag and add a link to a CSS document. So let's create that CSS document. Within the same directory that my HTML document is located at, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it states.css. And now that's there, I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to open up a link tag. I'm going to use REL to tell it what type of sheet it is. It's going to be a style sheet. And where it's supposed to get this style, I have to give it the file path, right? And because it's within the same directory, I can just add states.css. Now, what if it wasn't in the same directory? Let's say the states.css was inside this directory here called intro to CSS. Then I have to let my document know how to get there. And to get there, I need to go into intro to CSS /states.css. And that's how this will pretty much work. You tell it the direction of where it's located at in reference to the HTML document. What this is telling it is that, hey, I need to go into Intro to CSS. And within Intro to CSS, there's a document called states.css. That way it knows how to find it. But because before I had it on the same level as the HTML document, I don't need to navigate into any other directory. All I have to let it know is, hey, there's a document within the same directory that this HTML document is in, and that's called states.css. And this should successfully link our CSS documents. Now, let's make sure it works. Let's go ahead and remove this style here. This should default back to its normal state. And then we can navigate to our CSS document and actually add the CSS here. So, as mentioned before, we need this selector for what tag we're trying to format. And it's going to be the H1 tag. And after that, we're going to open and close some curly braces. And then within here, we can start adding our CSS. I'm going to say font size. And this is going to be, what option was giving me? Let's go with 50 pixels. And then it increases. And now if I want to add another item within my CSS, I have to add a semicolon here and then go to the next line. And I will say color. And color is going to be blue. And it formats my my font here. And then we can say font weight. And we'll say it's going to be lighter. And now it successfully formatted my H1. Now here's the kicker, right? I specifically formatted this H1 element, right? There's only one H1 element right now. What if later down the line, let's say right before the footer or the link, I add another H1 element and I say, this is my footer. And notice that it has the exact same styling as the other H1, right? Because right now, what my CSS document is saying is, hey, grab all H1 elements and give them the styling that's within these curly braces. So that's something to take into account. Does anybody have any questions on how I created the CSS document, how I linked it to my HTML document, and how I formatted my H1 tag?
Can you go over how to copy the states.html from lesson 2 to lesson 3 real quick? I missed that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a simple copy and paste. So just come to your lesson 02, right click on the file, and then just put copy, and then go to where you want to paste it. I'm pasting it directly into lesson 03, right? Because inside lesson 03, I have a folder, a README, and my HTML document, and I want my CSS document to, my states.html document to be on the same level as everything else. So I had to right click lesson 03 and just put paste.
Okay, that's what kind of what I thought, but
yeah, no problem. All right. So let's go ahead and continue forward. We talked about the H1. Now let's look at the P tag, right? Let's look at how this works. Let's go ahead and call the paragraph tag, open and close curly braces. And what kind of formatting did we do here? We did font size and text align. So we're going to do font size. And I'm going to say 20%. And notice that it shrunk everything. Now, the values, this is very interesting. There's a couple of variations of how we can set a property value. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But it set this to 20% of the regular font size, right? And that's what you need to take into account when it comes to what percent you're doing. If we do 100%, it brings it back to 100% of its default size, right? Because there is a specific size that the text is normally, and you can use percent signs to deal with that. You can also use pixels, as you saw here on the H1. I'm going to make the paragraph tag to 20 pixels. Let me see, it increased a little bit, but we can increase it by pixels. We can also do view height or view width. And when it comes to the view height and view width, it's referring to the size of our page in reference to the size of our screen. So if I say 20 view height for VH, it's going to get the size of 20 of the view height of my display, right? So that is another way that we can set property values. And we can talk about the different options. Let's go ahead and go to W3 Schools and see how that works. If we go to CSS, syntax letters. Where can we find it here? Margins, padding, height and width. Here we go. Height and width. Auto, that's a default, right? The browser calculates the height and the width. We can add length and width to the font. Let's go ahead and come back here. If we say the height, no, I think it's width 50, it's something like this. Okay, it's not gonna work. I think we do width colon 50 pixels. We can change the width of the text. Not very appealing way of doing things, but you are able to have width as a property, or we can do height. And you notice that it puts height between the paragraph tags. There is percent defines the height with a percent of the containing block. There's so many different property values. Let me see if I can find view height. CSS units. I think this is what I was looking for. Here we go. We have pixels. We have EM. We have percent signs. As you can see here what these units are. We can do it in centimeters, millimeters, inches, pixels, points. The EM unit is relative to the font size of the element. So 2M means 2 times the size of the current font, right? So if I say font size 2EM, and I miss a colon here, it pretty much does it to 200% of its default size, right? So 2M is in relative to its usual size. EX relative to the X height of the current font, rarely used. VWVH relative to 1% of the width of the viewport or the height of the viewport. Vmin and Vmax is another one you can use to 1% of the viewport's smaller dimension. So you can set a minimum and a max to it. So there's different units you can use. You can experiment with which ones you want to use. I tend to use a lot when it comes to the sizing. I like VH and view width, right? Because that's a little bit more dynamic. Because sometimes you might have people with different screen sizes. They might be on a phone, a mobile device in general. They're not always going to be in front of a computer, right? And that's something you have to take into your account when you're creating your application, is how accessible is going to be your application, right? And I learned this the hard way, because when I created my very first website, I was super excited, but I failed to take into account that I only coded it for a computer. So of course, like a normal person, I wanted to show off to my friends. I'm like, hey, check out my new website. And not all my friends were in front of their computer. So what do they have easily accessible? And this is very common these days, their phones. So they're gonna go to their phones and they looked up my website, and of course it looked like hot garbage, right? Because I did not develop my website to take into account a mobile device. So it was a little embarrassing, but it was a wake up call to make me more aware, to ensure that as I'm developing my website, to take into account how my website is supposed to be viewed. And a way of doing that is by using your inspect tool. On the very top left, you have here a toggle device toolbar. You can click this and you can set different settings for this. At the very top, there's dimensions being responsive. Responsive being like, seeing how responsive it is to the different sizes of devices that's being viewed in. Or you can be very specific. We can choose something like iPhone 14 Pro Max. If someone was viewing this website with their iPhone, this is how it would appear for them. Right. So when you're developing your application, definitely use this tool because it's very helpful to see how other people are going to view your website, because chances are most of your traffic for your application is going to come from a mobile device, right? Because these days everyone has a cell phone, and this is something to take into account. Maybe even iPads, iPad Pros, to see how it's going to be responsive. And seeing this and using this tool is how you're going to, uh, you know, create your application to ensure that it reaches all your users. I'm gonna go ahead and put a slight pause on this and go on a 10-minute break. We're gonna come back at 8 and we'll finish off class. I'll see you guys in 10 minutes.
Real quick, just for me, can you show me how you showed the different screen sizes?
Using your browser, you're gonna right click on your page and you're gonna click inspect. This is gonna open up some tools here. At the very top, you have a bunch of tabs. You want to click what it looks like a laptop and a phone. This will open up this page right here, where it's going to shape your application into a little box that lets you format it depending on the device that it's being viewed in. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. I'll see you guys in a bit. Oh, that's very unfortunate. I think I stopped it by accident. Oh, that means I have to edit the videos. Oh, what a pain. Because I accidentally stopped the recording from the previous recording. I have to edit these, and that itself take like another 30 minutes. So you might get to this video a little bit later. But let's go ahead and continue where we left off. We should all be looking at my VS Code in my browser. We're going to continue from where we left off. We talked about inline styling and how that works. We talked a little bit about style, and this right here, very similar to how you see here. Instead of adding this link tag, all you would do is add it just as such. You would open up a style tag, and then all your styling will be added on here. But this is not ideal, because imagine having this much styling on your code. You would have to come all the way down to see your HTML, right? This is absolutely insane. And I added these many lines because realistically, you're going to have this much, if not more, in styling when you start making your full stack application. Whether you add this here or at the bottom of your page, this is horrible for either debugging or updating your program. This is not really ideal. You want to be able to switch between back and forth on your application to be able to make the updates on your CSS and HTML at the same time, and not waste time scrolling up and down between your document to figure out how things are working. So not a great way of doing it, but it is a way, which is why we bring it up and teach it to you guys. But what we are going to be doing is using the link tag. That way we can just separate our different code between CSS and HTML into their own respective file. All
I had
right.
a quick question.
Yes.
So it kind of seems like, and this is me like confirming it for myself. So like say we're doing like a full web development, we're gonna have multiple files like HTML file, CSS, a JavaScript file, and then like whatever other languages we use, they're all going to be independent files and they kind of like merge together on the final product, it seems.
In a sense, yes.
Okay.
Right. You're gonna have two. So you'll have like one main directory, which will be your whole project, and then within this directory, you have like two other directories. One will be your front end, one will be your back end. Right. And then your front end, you'll have everything involving everything for the visual appearance of handling everything right here that's on your browser, which goes into your HTML, your JavaScript, your CSS, and then some. If you want a quick demonstration of that, I can show you something very quickly. I believe, where did I have it at? This is an assignment from when I went through Platoon. This is a music discovery app that I did for my final project. And I just want to show you the absurdity in how many files you're going to have, right? So right now it's very simple because we're working with two files, but the amount of files you have is a little insane, actually, right? So here you see I have my two directories. These is my README for my main project, my get ignored, my .env file, which you'll learn more about later on. But here you see my front end and my back end, right? This right here is just my front end, right? These are components. Let me minimize these. I have pages, I have components that do different things. This is going to seem very foreign to you guys, right? But this right here is just for grabbing my player. It's for grabbing my library, getting a song by a playlist, getting a song by by specifics, right? Whether like track duration, popularity of the song. So it gets very, very intense, right? Very complex. And then I actually have my actual pages that bring in all these components together. And it becomes a lot. I have a lot of different things. What else do I have? Assets. No, where's it at? Utilities. Look at this one file, right? This is all the utilities that I'm using to generate different things. It gets very in depth. So it's very important that you separate all your code into very specific files and directories. So when it comes to updating or debug your code or just development in general, everything is nice and neat and easily accessible. And you're able to scale your application as it go. This is just the front end, right? We're not even talking about the back end. Of everything else that goes into your program. Maybe it's not a good idea to show you all this because it can be a little intimidating looking at it all. But there's so much that goes into your project. So yes, everything else is gonna be separated into its own specific thing. It's gonna have its own code. My backend is pretty much all coded in Python. My front end is JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Does that answer your question, Chase?
Yeah, it does. And so like I think on the first day you said when you applied for an internship, you put like the work you had done. Is this like an example of what you created in Code Platoon as you would put on that like application for the internship? Okay.
Correct. As you go through your time with Platoon, everything that you do is to build your portfolio up, right? So you have the experience of actually doing this. By the time you graduate, you're going to build multiple APIs, multiple CRUD applications, multiple databases. You're going to have at least one single project you did of a full website that you can deploy. You will have one group project, and then some, right? So you will have a whole portfolio to demonstrate your skills, right? And then you put this on your resume, and when you get your interview, I've shown that exact project I just showed you. I've shown that project to interviewers before. I've gone to the code and explained to them what they were doing. They've asked about, hey, where your program is this doing this? I've gone and showed it, and I showed them how I did it and how I coded it, and took them step by step, line by line on my code to explain to them the process of what my application is doing, because that's what they expect to see from you, right? And we prepare you for that. Does that answer your question, Chase?
Yeah, it does. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. All right. So let's continue on with the CSS. Here we talked about the inline CSS. We talked about style, the link in it. We talked about how we actually write it. Let's go into the commonly used units. We have absolute units, right? These are your fixed sizes, and I show you a small demonstration of that of like pixels. You also have like centimeters. you can give them absolute units to define a specific size, or you can use relative units like the 2M, where it's twice the size of the current font, right? This is an ID, so it maybe not the best example for selector, but notice that here we set the width to 80%, right? The height is 50 of the view height, and we set the font size to 1.5, its usual default sizing, right? So there's different types of values that you can use to set different units. Now, commonly used ones, we saw color for the font, but what about background color? Well, you don't actually see it, but there is a background to this H1 header. And if I hover over it, you can kind of see it's highlighting it. And this is the actual background that's surrounding this H1, right? All this that you see there, I believe it's tan or beige. I don't know what you call this color. That is the background that surrounds this H1 element. And I can come down here into my CSS and say background color and set it to yellow. And you'll see that it changes it, right? So the background of the actual H1 is right here. I believe this is a padding that goes around it. We can set it to height being 500 pixels. And notice that the background is what changes, not the actual height of my font. That's dictated by the font size, but the height of the actual tag itself increases, right? We can say width is 200 pixels. And you see that it changes the width of that tag, and it compensates for that and brings it downward so it makes sure it fits the context of it, right? So that's how the background works in the background color. We talked a little bit about text and font, the font size, the font family. We didn't really speak about too much yet, or the text line. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and put this to. Let's get rid of this. And I'm going to say width is going to be 500 pixels as well. And then we can do text align. And we get a couple options already here, center, and so on and so forth. I think by default it's the top left. If we say center, you see that it centers it and the width of the tag itself, right? There's some other ones that you can use. Text align, I think align content. We can say center. There we go. And we can bring it down. So there's different properties that specify how you want to move it left, right, left, left, right, up or down, right? These do different things. This can be left, so left, and it'll be center left, right? So text align to the left, to the right, and then align the content up or down. Let's see what other options I have here. Flex N, I believe it brings it to the bottom. Yep, it does. So there's a lot of different properties and property values to give you a good example of how to customize your page. And as you already kind of saw, there's just so many that it would be impossible to cover every single one within this class. We have the text, the fonts, max width, we have position, floats. There's a lot, right? So we're gonna cover a couple of them. You'll see a lot more as well in your program, but this should give you enough to kind of start messing around with your document. We saw font family, no, text line. We didn't see font family. So let's look at font family. Let's put this to center, and let's say this is center. And now let's do font family. And here's a default that comes with CSS. We can change the font, and you see here that it changes. Arial is the first one. If for whatever reason this fails, it goes to Helvetica. If that fails, it goes to sans serif. So you have 3 different fonts that will use depending on whether your browser or computer can handle them or if these are still updated. Sometimes some fonts might be deprecated, no longer used. There's new updated versions of the fonts. So that's the reason for adding multiple different font families, right? The next one will be spacing and margin, right? So let's make a div here. So let's make a div for our settings here. So we can see the box in action. And all this, it didn't move, but it is all within a div. And now if I go to my CSS, let's add some CSS to this div. I'm going to say background color. I'm going to make it red. And now we can kind of manipulate this div to shape everything that's within here. And we can use margin and padding. If I hover over this div, here we can see the different margin and padding that's around this specific tag, right? And you have a little diagram here as well in your spec tools to show you what is what. But we're able to manipulate all the areas within this div as such. We can say margin. And if we just add margin, it's going to format everything, both left, right, top, and bottom. We can say 50 pixels. And if I hover over margin, you can see that's the margin there. I can say padding, and the padding is the space between your tag and the margin. Padding is going to be 100 pixels. Notice that this moves in the center, and there's now some space between the edge and the text. Right, here's the padding. We have the border. We have the margin. We can also add a border. Let's say solid black 2 pixels. And here we have a border. Notice that the border and the margin, there is some space between them. What if we say 100 pixels? Can I not change the background of the margin? What if we do 20 pixels? Margin. Let's see, what else do we have here? We can specify what margin we want to do. We can say margin top 100 pixels. We can say margin left 50 pixels. Right, so we're able to manipulate this box, this div. Do I have any questions on this? On margin, on padding, on border? I know it looks ugly, but it's kind of to show you that we can manipulate the margin padding around the different tags. And I believe everything should have a margin as well. All right, we can change the margin for, let's say the H1. Let's go with, let's add a border to the H1. Let's say it's solid, red, 5 pixels. We can say padding, going to be 20 pixels. Margin is 100 pixels. Right, so you can add margin, padding, border. Now imagine all of this all in line. Absolutely horrible. So you want to have everything within the CSS document so you can add everything within its own place and it doesn't overstimulate you. All right, so we talked about margin, we talked about padding. I just showed you border and the dimensions, right? So we were able to add a border around our different tags. We can specify the size of the border. It's not limited to pixels. You can use the different other units like EM or view height, view width. You can specify what type of border. I use solid. You can use other stuff besides solid. I believe you can use dashed. Let's go with 20 pixels. Dashed and blue. Right. So you can make different borders here. Where's my thing? All right, so you can add borders to stuff. You can even do it to the images, right? The image can have a border itself. You can add a width to the image. Do we have an image here that we can use? Let's add an image. We're gonna go with image. I'm gonna say source. And let's copy this Platoon icon, move it in here. I'm gonna say Platoon logo, PNG. There we go. And let's manipulate this image. I'm going to say border, 2 pixels, solid, black, right? We can say border radius. We can manipulate the border. We can say 5%. And the border radius is going to manipulate the corners. All right, we can change that. Let's say 15%. What do we do? 50%. There we go. A nice circle. We can say padding to 50 pixels. And we increase the padding. So we're able to do the same thing for the images. Background color, let's do purple. And you can see the purple between the padding and the margin. The background, this is the image itself, but the background where the image is located at, we change the color. So there's a lot you can do with your CSS, right? The sky's the limit. We talked about different units. And let's talk a little bit about specificity. We'll get to the font in a little bit. Specificity. I kind of talked about it a little bit, but it's referring to what takes precedence in your CSS, right? And this little diagram kind of gives you an example of how that works, the specificity. From left to right, what has the highest level of specificity? The one that I said that has the highest precedence, as you might have already guessed, is your inline styling, right? When you add an inline styling to a tag, it automatically gets a point of specificity right here. So what this makes it, it gives it a point status of specificity of 1,000, right? If you added an ID and it had an ID of specificity, it will only be 100, right? Because instead of inline styling, let's say you didn't add any inline styling, but you reference it with an ID, the ID will be 100. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's take a look at that. We have a couple headers. We had the header 1 that had the state example, and we had the header 1 that had that this is my footer, right? And we saw that both of these, where is it at? I have so much code here. There we go. Right, this is my footer. It's right here. And here we have the stakes example. They both took the same CSS when I changed the H1. But what if I only want to add this styling to this stakes example, but I want to add something different to this specific H1 element? Well, at that point, that's when we do something like classes or IDs. We'll start with the class, right? This class is going to be footer, right? And nothing has changed yet, right? They both still have the same styling, but when I come down here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify that I want to add some styling to something with a specific class, right? And if I remember correctly, the class is with a dot. Let's say it's footer. Color red. It's either a dot or a hashtag. Okay, it was a dot. Right. Notice that when I came here and I did dot footer and I did color red, the color of my font changed, right? And the reason for that is because what I'm doing here is I'm adding a styling to something that has a class called footer, right? To specify a class in your CSS, you're using the dot, right? Before, what we used was just the selector itself, which was with the H1. But down here, instead of grabbing selector, what I'm doing is I'm grabbing a class, right? And this class is called footer. So every element that has the footer class is going to take the CSS that belongs within this specific CSS style, right? And let's override a couple other things. Let's say the font size, instead of 50 pixels, I'm going to make this one font size 25 pixels. And we see that this changes, but this one doesn't, right? Even though they're both H1s, down in my CSS, I added styling for a class. So this overrode the H1 because this specific tag has the class footer. Now, going back to the specificity part of this, the element has the lowest level of specificity, right? We see here the highest to lowest. On the right side, we have the lowest level, and as we go to the left, this becomes the highest, right? So element has the lowest level of specificity. So the class overrode anything that was set for the element tag, right? Does that make sense for you guys so far?
It does, but what are the numbers actually conveying?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's go ahead and do some TL draw. Let's do an H1 element. Now, right now, this is my H1 element, and I'm going to add some CSS to it. And in my CSS, I called it using the element, right? The tag itself, the H1 element, right? The moment that I add this tag and I say color is red, this now gets 1 point of specificity, right? That added 1 point of specificity. Now, what if I added a class of like header, and in my CSS element, I call this class called header, and I say color is blue. What this did, it added 10 points of specificity, where this only has 1 point, right?
No, I get that, and the 10 points would obviously override the 1 point. But if I had 10, or say I had 11 elements that all said color red, would it have 11 points and therefore override the 10-point class?
Not necessarily the element itself, but how many classes it might have. So for example, this has a class called header, but let's also add an ID. The ID is going to be ID of main header. I think it's a string, right? Let's add a different level of specificity. This one is 1,000 points. And an ID is using the hashtag. This is 1,000, right? But you said, what if we have multiple elements? What if we had it in H2?
No, that's not what I mean. I'm saying because you're using numbers instead of saying it's just a hierarchy, to me, that means that you could screw yourself up by adding points. Like if you added 10 1-point values, would you override or tie with like the class, for instance? If I had
Okay, I see what you're saying.
H1 color red 10 times in my code or 11 times in my code, would it override the single 10-point value class color blue?
No, it will not. It will use the cascading effect, right? So we had H1 color purple, and we had like 10 of these bad boys. No, so it is a little misleading to use the point system. I do not believe it would do that. And as a matter of fact, we can try it out if you like to give you a better example. We come here and let's go ahead and say H1 color purple. And down here we have the footer. Let's look at it. It's still red, right? So the point system is a little misleading. We use it to kind of give you an example that to show the hierarchy, but the point system doesn't really mean too much. What it refers to is what takes precedent over the other, right? So ID is the highest, then it's the class, then it is the, oh my bad, I meant to say
Inline's the highest, right?
inline, yep, inline, ID, class, and then element. So if you try to call something with the elements, so this is actually 100, my bad. This is 10, and this is 1 point. That's all it's really trying to convey. The point system doesn't actually mean anything. It's mainly just trying to show it to you in a numerical way to kind of understand it. Maybe it was more confusing to do it that way, but depending which one you call, one will take precedence over the other depending on where they land on the hierarchy. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe I should fix that there. But it does have different levels of specificity depending on which one of these you use. Inline styling will always override IDs. IDs will always override classes, and classes will always override elements. All right. So when it comes to adding CSS to your HTML element, you want to use inline very, very sparingly because if later on in your document you try to create an ID or a class for it, it won't work, right? And then you have to figure out why it's not working, right? So typically you want to start with a class. It seems to be the standard from what I see. No one really does elements. We try to avoid these as well because this would just format every single element. We tend to start with classes, honestly, more frequently. And then if we ask this a little bit more unique, we start adding IDs. And once again, we try to avoid inline as well because that would just override every other CSS that has been added, right? So something to take into account. Does that make sense, Tim?
Yeah, it's crystal clear now.
Okay, thank you. So that takes care of the specificity. Once again, here is another example here. We have the low specificity being the tag itself, higher specificity being the class, and then the ID being the highest specificity besides inline, right? We try to avoid inline completely. But here's a nice little example of how this will work. This will override anything that comes before it naturally. Let's look at the assignment colors. All right, so we have the little practice assignment, and I'm gonna work with it with you guys to get a better example. We already have it pre-made for you guys. We have the H1, H2 section, and a footer. Now we're gonna use the actual text that's within here to kind of have an idea of how we are going to format this. So let me close everything else up. The CSS style sheet is already linked to it. It's on the same level within this colors directory. And we're going to tackle the very first one, which is make this text blue, underline, and have a gold background. So right now, we don't have classes, we don't have ID, so we're just going to use the elements. So to make this specific line of text here, this header, I'm going to call the H1 element within my CSS. We want to make this text blue, so I'm going to say fonts, or actually I think it's colored blue. We want to do underline. I believe that's going to be our font style. I guess it's not. Do we have an underline one? I don't remember the underline one. Text decoration. That's what it was. Text decoration. And then we have underline. There we go. I'm going to give this a gold background. There's a background color, gold. And there you have it. We're able to change the text. We're able to decorate this text with an underline, and we're able to give it a gold background. So that takes care of the first one. Now let's go to the H2 element. We're going to make this text purple, bolded, 25 pixels, and have an orange border. So let's go ahead and go to our CSS. We're going to call the H2 element. We have to make the color purple. It needs to be bolded, so I want to say it's font style. And it's not bolded. Is it text decoration again? Oh God. Give me a second. I am very rusty with this. He says bolded. Font weight. Bold. There we go. Bold. Okay. We'll go into the font size. It'll be 25 pixels. I'm going to say border. Well, it doesn't specify the size, so I'll say 1 pixel. And I'm going to say solid and orange. There we go. And then the rest, I'm going to leave it open up for you guys to give it a try to get the rest of these per what it's asking from you guys. All right. Do you have any questions on how this assignment is going to work or how to style elements? All right. We'll leave it open and there for now. We'll continue back with this. Let's talk about relationships. All right. So here we have a code example. We have a section with a paragraph within it. And the bottom, we have a section with an article, and inside this article, there's a paragraph. Now, if I wanted to make this paragraph a specific color, I can call all these specific paragraphs by using the p tag, or I can be very specific of what p tag I want to use without using an ID or a class or even using inline styling. And by doing that, I can use this greater than symbol, this arrow. What this is telling on my CSS is that, hey, I want to grab any section that has a p tag nested within it, and this is going to change the color of this p tag to red. Now, how do you think this one is working? Well, it's very similar to the one on top. The only difference is that this one is not specifying that the P has to be directly nested within the section. Right here, by adding section and then P, what this is saying is, hey, I want you to grab any section, and it does not matter whether the paragraph tag comes directly after section. If there's a paragraph tag anywhere within this nested section tag, I want you to change the color to red. Right? So here, the relationship is dictated by this arrow. Right? This arrow is going to tell my CSS that the P tag has to come directly after this section tag. Whereas the one on the bottom, it's not specifying that it should come directly afterwards. It's saying that it has to be somewhere within the section tag. And both of these are going to accomplish the exact same thing, but they have different purposes. Right? This matter right here is going to be for anything that's directly after a section tag, and this one is for anywhere within the section tag. Right? And we can see a small demonstration here. If we go to the relationships one, we have here a different assignment where we have hello, world, zebra, unicorn, and duck. Right? We have some instructions in text here. The first one is to make my H1 font purple. Right? So let's open up the CSS for this one. I'm going to say H1 font, or actually it's going to be colored. We'll say purple. Right? And because there's only one H1, this hello turns to purple. Now the next one is going to be make all H2s font yellow. Well, we have a couple H2s, right? If I wanted to make all the H2s purple, how would that work?
Would you have to do like a body and then H2? Or body and body and then H2?
Not necessarily. If it's going to be all the H2 elements, I would just put H2 color, and these will be yellow, right? Because I'm not specifying where, I just put H2. What this is going to say is, hey, I'm just grabbing all H2 elements. I'm not specifying whether I am grabbing them from a body and then H2 or body H2. But it will still do the exact same thing, Chase, as what you just mentioned. Because technically, what this is saying is, hey, I want you to grab the body, and anywhere within the body, if there's an H2 element, doesn't matter if it's nested, I want you to turn it to yellow. So both of these are going to do the exact same thing. Right? And we see here that it does not change. But that is one way of doing it. And we'll see how this comes to play in a little second. So we turn all the H2 fonts to yellow, but now we change our mind. You only want the world and zebra to be yellow. Right? Well, world and zebra are within this section. So as of right now, how can I specify that this should only be the ones within this section here?
Should you do it like the body and then section and then H2?
Yeah, I definitely could do that. Let's give it a try. We can say body, section, and H2. But what happened here?
Duck is no longer.
Well, yeah, of course, right? But we only wanted the world and zebra to change. Why did unicorn change?
Because it comes after the article, right?
It comes after the article, right? But the way that this is set, this is saying, hey, I want you to grab the body. Anywhere within this body, if there's a section, and anywhere within this section, if there's an H2, I want you to make it yellow. And it worked for these, right? Because technically, section does have a H2 for world and zebra, and it is within the body, but so does this one. What's different between this section and this section? Well, one comes right after article. So what we have to specify to ensure that we do not get unicorn to turn yellow is that the H2 element has to come directly after this section. It can't be anywhere in here, right? Because we can do a div here, and we can add the unicorn, and it'll still format it, right? Because it's going to be anywhere within this section, but we don't want that to happen. We want it to be only if it's coming directly after this section. So to fix that, we add the arrow. And now what this is saying is, hey, I want you to grab a section, and if there's an H2 element that's nested directly underneath section, that needs to be yellow. And this is going to pass. But this one fails, right? Because this H2 element isn't coming directly after section. It has to go through the article, and then it's going to go into a div, and then it comes into the H2 tag. Does that make sense, Chase?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Let's show that like the arrows, specifying operator, basically.
Yeah, the arrow is going to specify the relationship between these two tags. And the relationship between these two is that H2 is directly coming after section. Whereas before, this doesn't specify if it comes directly after. It's just saying, hey, all the H2 elements within a section are going to be yellow. So the arrow is going to specify whether it's coming directly after it or if it's anywhere within the element. Does that make sense, Tim, Jason, Kenny?
It does, but it seems like it'd be limiting. And why wouldn't you just use an ID?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Like, why not just use classes and IDs? It just seems like all the relationships just seem a little more confusing.
You definitely can, right? So it's going to dictate to however you want your website to work. Like I said, there's many ways to skin a cat. We're just showing you different ways of how you can make a relationship between your elements. Right, so because you're gonna see both of these. You're gonna see both the arrow, right? You're gonna see both just the way that is now, right? Or you're gonna see IDs. Whichever one you use is gonna dictate to how much control you want to have over your elements, right? If you want to specify that this has to have the ID or class, then do it that way, right? But if your specific application should have all H2 elements to be formatted, if they come directly after a section, then that's one way of doing it, right? So there's different ways of doing this. There's no specific right or wrong answer. It's just a flexibility that you have as a developer. Does that make sense, Jason? So you're absolutely correct. Why
Yeah,
not just
I understand what you're getting at. Just another way of doing things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You definitely can. Why not just use an ID or whatnot? You definitely can, and we're going to cover that in a little bit, right? So we were able to make the H2 element that comes directly after section to yellow. So we succeeded with this one. Next one is going to be to make unicorn and duck font red, right? Unicorn and duck font red. So here's unicorn. Let's get rid of this div because this was not here. What does these two share in similarity that we can take advantage of to make both of these red?
They're nested within an article.
Yeah, they're nested within an article. So we can say article, and then what tag is this? It's an H2. And I'm going to say color, red. And only these two turn red, even though they're both H2 elements, just like zebra and world, but these specifically are only coming after the article. Right? You change your mind again. Make unicorn font orange. Right? Unicorn has to be orange. So how can we fix this one?
Could you do like the section and then arrow, article, arrow, H2?
Yeah, we can say section, article, H2, and then change this to, what was it? Orange. And there you have it. We successfully gave all these their individual colors depending on where they come in their relationship and hierarchy of our H2 HTML element. Do I have any questions on the relationships between our HTML elements?
Nope.
All right. So we talked about relationships. We briefly covered colors. You guys are more than welcome to continue trying that out. And we talked about specificity, right? Tags have 1 point in a concept, right? In this concept, we have 1 point for tags. Classes have 10 points. IDs have 100. And we want to avoid inline styling because they tend to have the highest level of specificity, so they would take precedence over everything else, right? And there is a document for this one. This document is going to be the specificity one. And I'm going to leave this, guys, to you guys for homework to give this to try before tomorrow's class. I'll take a small consensus to see if everyone was able to do it. And if not, then we can do it tomorrow. But you're going to practice using the specificity with IDs in classes to try to reach the outcome of what this text is asking from you. Does anybody have any questions? All right, we're going to stop there with the lecture because I know it was a lot to cover. But up to this point, you guys should be able to change the colors on the colors of HTML. You should be able to work with relationships depending on whether you're using the arrow or if it's just specifying anywhere within the specific tag. And I'm going to leave you guys here off with the specificity one for tomorrow so we can get a better example of how all these three work. Do you have any questions on anything that was covered today? Questions, comments, anything at all? Is anybody confused at all in any shape, way, or form? Jason?
I think there's no getting around the fact that you just need to put in the work and get in the practice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want you guys give these a try, right? I want you guys to give the colors a try. And I want you to also give the relationships a try yourself. And then come back to me afterwards. Right, there's also this, which we'll talk about tomorrow. But let's leave the specificity for tomorrow. And I want you guys, after class, give the colors and the relationship a try. Sound good? And then we'll do a small recap tomorrow to ensure that we're good on these before we continue with the specificity. All right, that's going to conclude today's class. I know it was a lot. CSS, there's different ways of navigating and adding your styling in there, and it can get very confusing. So we'll do a small recap in a much slower fashion. It's just that there's just so much to teach with such a limited time that it's very difficult to ensure that I get everything within the class time to ensure that everyone is good to move forward. If you look at the rest of the schedule, we have a lot to cover within these 3 weeks, and it's only going to get more complex. So we'll definitely take a little bit of time to cover what we covered today. Tomorrow, I'll concoct some new assignment that we can put everything together and see how it works, it ties in. Sound good? All right, guys. If I have no further questions, I will see y'all tomorrow. Thank y'all for today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.